going to be the Board of Peace, mostly. It's going to be run by the Board. This Board of Peace has been it's led by some amazing people. Board of Peace.
It's now been 1 week since President Trump announced that his Board of Peace had reached a historic agreement in Gaza for the complete disarmament of Hamas.
It's a great breakthrough. Nobody thought that would be possible, to disarm Hamas.
Trump said that as Hamas disarms, Israeli forces would withdraw, but the question of who goes first still seems unresolved. Hamas confirmed that it agreed to the plan. The Israeli Prime Minister says his country did not agree to the terms. And in the days since it was all made public, Israeli strikes in Gaza have continued. From the BBC, I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C., and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. You know, Jeremy, we were speaking on our team just the other day about whatever happened with this Board of Peace that we heard about from the Trump administration. It was nearly 6 months ago that it had its first big meeting. And candidly, we have not heard very much about the Board of Peace or from the Board of Peace, I would say, in the interim. And then a week ago, President Trump announced that the board had reached, in his words, a major milestone in the Gaza peace plan. Here we are a week after that announcement was made by the White House. And do you have any greater clarity of what is going on, whether Israel is on board with this deal and whether Hamas is on board with this deal?
Let's start with the Israelis. The Israelis have said they will essentially wait and see until Hamas have decommissioned all their weapons. And of course, Hamas does not want to disarm. Now, what shifted Hamas to accept the idea of decommissioning their weapons? I think the arguments being made by the intermediaries who they believe have their interests at heart, Palestinian interests at heart, who are the Turks and the Qataris, is that, look, if you want to get any kind of a political role in the future, Hamas has to evolve. The new overall political leader of Hamas, Khalil al-Hayya, is a man he's identified with some, very sort of hardline Hamas views, but also, I've met him, I interviewed him a year into the Gaza war, and he struck me as a guy with a wide understanding of what was going on, in no sense some kind of ranting and raving ideologue. Plus, what this does by accepting this form of words, it bats the ball back into Israel's court. And I think they're well aware of the fact that President Trump and his people will be keen to have a deal. And so then the question is, the pressure might go on to Israel to do their side of the bargain, which is supposedly to withdraw from Gaza. And Israel, I think, has no desire whatever to pull back from Gaza. And I think this government, actually, the evidence is, has no intention of so doing, despite what the Americans may hope for. So that's more or less where they got to at the point where the deal was announced.
Can I ask you a few questions about the process and the logistics of this deal? What about timeline? Has a timeline been specified?
There is apparently a document which has a timetable on it. But at the moment, the start, they haven't reached the start line. I think we can get a bit too lost in the detail of stuff that actually hasn't really emerged. And of course, there's always ambiguity in diplomatic conversations, because sometimes that's the only way you can get a deal. So sometimes it's a cloak. It can be a cloak. But it only works if both sides essentially feel that they don't have a choice and they have to move towards some kind of agreement. And I question whether that point is at all reached in this process. What there is, and it's available online, is a document which has got 15 points. I've got it in front of me at the moment. If anyone is watching this visualized podcast, you'll see me looking at it. I've printed it out. It has 15 points. It's called A Roadmap for Completing the Implementation of President Trump's Comprehensive Peace Plan in Gaza. And it came out just at the same time as that agreement. This is essentially what they're supposed to have signed up to.
So it sounds like time frame, not entirely sorted out yet. What about the actual weapons? Do we have any sense of how many and what weapons Hamas has?
No, they talk about things like heavy weapons.
What does that mean?
Well, yes, heavy weapons means things which aren't Kalashnikovs, are not light weapons, probably
I see.
aren't heavy machine guns, but they're things where you might fire a shell out of it, rocket launcher. It's not clear how much of that stuff they've actually got left. Anti-tank weapons. And so you're asking about decommissioning. I'm just looking at point 8. A process to decommission and store heavy weapons, military production sites, depots of weapons and tunnels shall begin after completing the remaining commitments under the Sharm el-Sheikh Protocol, the entry of NCAG, this is the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the technocratic body, and the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, the ISF. There is no ISF, right, at this point. This is meant to be a kind of peacekeeping force. It doesn't exist.
And this commission is Palestinian technocratic officials?
Yes,
or
a sort of new
so
government.
The weapons would not be going to the Israelis?
You know, a new government, and they would be, and it's not quite sure what the details would be, but these weapons would be under the sort of overall control of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which is this new technocratic body, and this NCAG or NCAG, I don't know how they're calling themselves, hasn't entered Gaza. All right, so none of that has happened.
I mean, this sounds very far away from actually happening.
It is, but it also, this is crucial, also on point 8. This process shall be linked to an Israeli withdrawal in phases from the areas under its control in Gaza and the decommissioning of armed militias. Now, armed militias is a reference to the militias of Palestinians that Israel supports there. And they in some of the areas that they control, say in the south, they have armed and established militias, which a lot of Palestinians say basically were formulated on, some of them are criminal gangs. And they have been doing, some of the Israelis, you might say, dirty work in Gaza, and other Palestinians who've chosen to work with the Israelis in return for Israeli protection, no doubt for a lot of money, and also for weapons. And so they will have to lose their weapons as well, according to the agreement.
What do we know about the backstory on how this deal came about? Because it didn't seem to be that Gaza was really, quite frankly, the chief foreign policy priority for this White House for the last several months.
Well, of course, the White House and Donald Trump himself have had a lot of other things to think about, notably the war with Iran. And President Trump's attention span is notoriously brief. And you'll remember back in, it was last October when they had the ceasefire in the Gaza war, he welcomed it. He went out there. He was in Israel. He went to Egypt. He said it was the most significant thing that's happened in the Middle East for 3,000 years, that there would now be peace. He's never one, as you know, to undersell a deal. But the reason why you probably haven't heard from the Board of Peace all that much in the last 6 months or so is because I don't think, apart from their director of the Board of Peace, who's been doing a lot of diplomacy, there hasn't been a great deal going on because, a lot of it depends on America's focus. And Trump's two favorite envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, have been very much involved in other things, notably Iran. So what's been happening, though, is that there is mediation going on. The Qataris are very involved. The Turks have been very involved with Hamas, the Egyptians, and Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, who is the director of the Board of Peace, who is a Bulgarian diplomat, former defense minister, a man who's had a number of jobs in the Middle East and is well connected. And so they've been trying to get this thing going.
We've heard from Trump administration officials who say that Israel was consulted at every step along the way. We heard from President Trump himself characterize Israel as being very happy with this deal. And yet that does not seem to be the tone and response that, at least publicly, we have seen from anyone in the Israeli government to date.
One of the great ironies of this, and again, this is from sources involved in the talks, is that essentially, as one source said to me, the Israelis were in the room. I mean, not literally in the room with Hamas, but they were involved in the negotiations because Mladenov would be talking to them. They talk as well to the Egyptians. The Israeli government itself isn't very happy about talking to the Turks, and they're not keen on the Qataris either. And they're also said to be unhappy about this whole idea of concept of decommissioning. What does that mean? What they'd like to see is the whole lot of them either in Israeli hands or put into some gigantic metal grinding machine that will destroy them all.
Jeremy, I get a sense now from you of what the Israeli response to this deal has been. What has Hamas's response been, and how did you glean what they were thinking?
Look, Hamas have agreed to the deal, and that in itself is significant because it is the only time up to now that they have agreed to disarm. What Hamas believes is a legitimate armed struggle against Israel is deep in their DNA as a movement. Hamas is an Arabic acronym for the Islamic resistance movement. And resistance means fighting, right? And so you need weapons for that. So this for them is potentially a very big deal. There are sweeteners in this whole thing for them. But I think that they're essentially at a point where they are aware of the appalling conditions inside Gaza. They're aware as well that they need to try to regain some credit while they have a hard core of support inside Gaza. Of course, there are plenty of people who used to have actually not bad lives at all, who now are living in tents and have lost everything. There's disease where there are problems with getting clean water. There is more food getting in than there was. And the other thing that Israel's doing is continuing airstrikes, and they are still killing people on quite a scale. More than 1,100 people killed inside Gaza, including many, many children, since the ceasefire last October. Just as I speak to you, there's been a mass funeral of members, something like 120 members of one family, whose remains have been disinterred from beneath the rubble, where they have been lain for getting on for 2 years. And there are believed to be, and there's very strong evidence that there are thousands more human remains beneath the rubble in Gaza. So it is an absolutely horrendous living environment that all these people are squeezed into. And don't forget that even before this war started, when Palestinians had the whole of Gaza, not a big area, but the whole of Gaza, it was still one of the most overcrowded places on the planet. And now that same number of people are in basically a third of the territory that once they occupied. So that is desperate. And while, believe you me, they blame Israel, they'd also blame Hamas for all of that. People like me, journalists like me, are not allowed into Gaza by the Israelis. And I think that's clearly because the Israelis do not want free reporting by foreign media, by on the ground, because I think that's because they essentially have things they don't want the world to see of what's going on there.
How much of Gaza is Israel controlling now? And is Israel doing what it said it would do when this ceasefire was signed way back in October?
It's getting on for 70% under the control of the Israelis, certainly 60% plus. It's hard to say with great precision because they move the markers of the so-called yellow line.
The yellow line demarcates the control that Israel has in Gaza.
And they've moved it and taken more of the territory. And as well as doing that, they have also established a buffer zone on the, if you like, the Hamas side of the yellow line. And if anyone goes into the buffer zone, they get shot. And there have been many incidents of Palestinians being shot dead by Israeli soldiers when they have, sometimes unwittingly, I think, found themselves in that buffer zone. The ceasefire was meant to start a process in which Hamas disarmed and Israel pulled out. That was meant to be the central bargain, the central deal at the heart of it all. And up to now, Hamas has not disarmed, though they, of course, as we've been discussing, have said that they're now prepared to. But Israel has not said it is prepared to pull out of Gaza. Far from it. It has actually taken more territory. To start off, the time of the ceasefire, Israel controlled roughly 50% of the Gaza Strip, which is a tiny piece of land. I think it's about 28 miles long. I don't think it's any wider than about 10 or 12 miles. In lots of places, a lot narrower than that. And but getting on for 2.5 million Palestinians live in this very, very small space. So Israel has shown no sign whatever of willingness to pull out of Gaza. Indeed, there is a great deal of pressure from the far right in Israel, not just to stay there with a military occupation, but to allow Israeli Jewish civilians to settle inside Gaza. The defense minister, Mr. Katz, has spoken about a particular kind of military settlement that he wants to start there. And these are called Nahal settlements. The Nahal is one of the major units historically of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, which is a sort of fighting, pioneering unit going back to the start of the state. And as well as being elite troops, they are also troops who would then be involved in building and settling and so Nahal settlements have a history of starting military and going civilian. So when the Israeli defense minister says to Israelis, we would like to put Nahal settlements inside Gaza, every Israeli knows what that means.
Jeremy, hearing how much of this deal still, it seems, is unresolved, I'm left wondering how this actually moves forward, because it sounds like the Israelis want Hamas to do something first. They want them to completely disarm. And it sounds like Hamas is saying, no, you've got to do this other thing. And the question is, who goes first? And ultimately, it almost sounds like you need these things to happen simultaneously. You need Israel to withdraw from Gaza, and you need Hamas to disarm. But you need them to happen at the same time, and it sounds like there is limited political capital from a party like the United States right now to be able to nudge this along and make sure it happens at the same time. You have been all over the world for the last 40 years covering wars and conflicts. Have you ever seen peace come out of a situation like this with two sides so fundamentally far apart who do not seem to trust one another?
Yeah. Look, Mr. Mladenov, who is the diplomat, who is the director of the border peace from Bulgaria, he's very experienced in the way that things have happened in the Middle East. He had a big UN job dealing with the Middle East, so he knows what he's on about. And what they've said is that they appreciate that there is zero trust between both sides. That's why the documentation that's come out has been very detailed. It's a step-by-step basis, and essentially the idea is that it's verifiable as you go. You don't have to trust, but you can verify. Yes, that's realistic, but it's also a sign of how really hard all this is. The thing is, everything is political. And the political side of thing on the Israeli side is that there's an election coming up at the end of October.
And Netanyahu is on the ballot.
He's not just on the ballot, he's behind in the polls. The presumption among Israeli politicians is there are no votes, zero votes, in being seen to be soft on Hamas. So any kind of concession towards Hamas is a potential vote loser. And don't forget Netanyahu's language after the 7th of October attacks, when throughout the war, he said there will be total victory. Hamas will be wiped off the face of the planet. And now, actually, Hamas is a player in negotiations. They are still there. They've lost most of their senior people, thousands of their fighters, but they are still there.
Well, Jeremy, not a particularly optimistic note to end on, but I, as always, do appreciate you bringing your analysis to us. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
That's it for The Global Story on YouTube today. Thanks, as always, for spending some time with us. And if you appreciated our show, I ought to mention that The Global Story is also available as an audio podcast. So you can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.